Condemned to death and forced to exile from his homeland twice, the first time honing his skills leading irregulars in two civil wars in South America, and the second to Staten Island, eventually leading him back to Italy, where he would become one of Italy's fathers of the fatherland. Welcome back to Scrolling Strategy. This is the story of Giuseppe Garibaldi, the Sardinian Godfather. Born on July 4th, 1807 in Nice, which at the time was a part of the French Empire. His father, Giovanni, worked as a merchant mariner and coastal trader, which stemmed from a lineage of fishermen and Mediterranean commerce. This would influence Garibaldi's early inclinations toward maritime pursuits. His mother, Maria, belonged to a family of modest social-economic standing and was also tied to maritime activities through regional coastal networks. In adolescence, he followed in his father's footsteps, engaging in coastal commerce between Nice and Mediterranean ports. These early voyages would include trips to Levant and the Black Sea regions, as well as Italian harbors, providing him with practical experience in navigation and command. By 1832, at the age of 25, he was qualified as a merchant marine captain, commanding vessels such as the Costanza in trade routes that would expose him to diverse political discussions. This would be where he would become acquainted with the principles of Giovine Italia, or Young Italy, a revolutionary society founded by Giuseppe Mazzini in 1831. Its main purpose was to advocate for a unified Italy, free from monarchical control and foreign domination. Now, you have to understand that around this time, Italy was broken apart into about 10 different kingdoms. The easiest way to describe it is think American Revolution, but instead of the colonies joining together, it was four dudes just beating the shit out of the other kingdoms. As Giovanni had his nationalist sentiments ignited, he headed to Genoa in November of 1833, where he shakes hands with Mazzini and formally joins the organization, swearing an oath of loyalty to its Republican ideals and readiness for armed insurrections. Emboldened by his affiliation, Garibaldi participates in Mazzini's coordinated uprising against the Piedmontese rule in 1834. He was specifically tasked with sparking revolts in Genoa by organizing a sailors' mutiny to capture warships and the naval arsenal, eventually including insurrections in Savoy. But due to poor coordination and betrayal, the plot fell apart and the Piedmontese courts sentenced him to death for conspiracy and sedition, marking his full commitment to radical republicanism and prompting his first permanent exile to South America in 1835 to avoid capture.
Wolverines!
Arriving in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil in April of 1836, he quickly aligned with the separatist Rio Grandense Republic amid the ongoing Ragamuffin War, a provincial revolt against the Brazilian Empire for seeking autonomy for Rio Grande do Sul due to economic grievances over high taxes and trade restrictions. Using his already honed skills as a merchant, he volunteered as a naval captain for the rebels, taking command of small schooners and engaging in coastal raids and blockades to disrupt imperial supply lines. As Garibaldi was hitting the Brazilian Empire with boats in 1839, he met his wife Anita, who had even joined him in combat, bearing arms and participating in his campaign. By 1840, Brazilian forces had recaptured key territories, leaving the rebels defeated, and Garibaldi and Anita were discharged and compensated with cattle, which they and a small band of followers herded them overland to Montevideo, Uruguay. By 1841, they were settling in Montevideo, even amidst the ongoing Uruguay Civil War. By 1842, the Great Siege of Montevideo had started. Garibaldi organized the Italian Legion, who all wore the red shirts that were obtained from a factory and intended to head to a slaughterhouse. These shirts would become their icon. They would bolster the defensive force in Montevideo. He employed guerrilla tactics, forming small mobile units for raids that would harass the besiegers and relieve pressure on the city. Garibaldi's tactical acumen would shine in key engagements such as the Battle of San Antonio on February 8, 1846, where his legion of 200 would repel a larger force, inflicting heavy casualties. This would continue on to other victories in his campaign. His style of leadership would involve personal bravery, leading from the front with improvised weapons. Fostering loyalty among his troops, Garibaldi would continue to fight in Uruguay until April 1848.
Our beloved republic is in the hands of madmen. This is a dark day.
Arriving at Nice by late June 1848 with 60 of his legionaries, they would join the fight against Austrian domination in the First Italian War of Independence. They would offer their services to King Charles Albert of Sardinia, but due to Garibaldi's Republican background and his irregular status, it would prevent his full integration into the Royal Army. Drawing on a South American experience, he raised a volunteer legion of several hundred men and operated semi-independently in support of the Piedmontese efforts. On August of 1848, the armistice of Sulaco was signed, halting all major hostilities and ceding Milan to Austrian control, prompting widespread demobilization among the Italian forces. Garibaldi denounced the armistice as a betrayal, refusing to disband his volunteers. He shifted to guerrilla operations in Lombardy to harass retreating and occupying Austrian units. His first formal command focused on Lake Maggiore region, crossing into Austrian-held territory and liberating the town Sesto Kelland at the lake's southern tip, launching raids that would disrupt Austrian supply lines. Garibaldi's campaign demonstrated tactical prowess in hit-and-run ambushes, leveraging terrain for mobility, but it lacked the scale to alter the war's trajectory as Austria maintained their control over Lombardy Venetia. With volunteers dwindling from desertions, on February 9, 1849, proclamation of the Roman Republic was signed, replacing the Papal State temporarily by a Republican government. As Garibaldi arrived in Rome, he once again formed the Italian Legion and assumed command of the city's defenses. Numbering around several thousand, they would repel an initial French assault in April of 1849 and once more again in May, pushing back an invasion from Neapolitan troops. These early victories would bolster the Republican position, but the sustained pressure from the French position eroded the defenders' resources over the ensuing months. On June 3, 1849, the French launched a decisive assault. Garibaldi organized resistance from key positions, but the Republic's makeshift army could not withstand the bombardment and infantry advances. On the eve of French entry into Rome on July 3, Garibaldi rallied 4,000 volunteers and proclaimed Rome or death, rejecting the surrender and leading to a retreat northward to evade capture. Being pursued by Austrian, French, and Papal forces, his column suffered heavy attrition and hardship, dwindling to a few hundred by August. He would even lose his wife Anita to exhaustion and illness, prompting Garibaldi to disband most of his remaining forces and seek refuge in San Marino. Once again condemned to death in absentia by the Papal authorities for his Republican activities, Garibaldi evaded arrest in Genoa and Nice before departing for exile abroad, initially via Tunis and ultimately arriving in New York on July 21, 1850. Hampered by insufficient funds to secure a ship for further exile and maintain a low profile to avoid extradition under international warrants, Garibaldi resided primarily on Staten Island. Hosted by Antonio, a fellow Italian exile and inventor, originally his plan was to acquire a vessel and start smuggling arms and volunteers back to Italy. But due to lack of funds, he instead assisted in the manufacturing of smokeless tallow candles and occasionally engaging in local fishing and sailing. These activities would provide a modest income while he discreetly connected with Italian immigrant communities, gathering modest support for future Italian unification. By mid-1851, Garibaldi would transition to maritime command, captaining trading vessels that took him as far as Peru, China, the Philippines, and even Australia. In 1853, he made a brief return to the United States and departed for New York once more, carrying cargo to England, arriving a year later in Newcastle. He was greeted by industrial workers and Republican radicals. This marked his re-entry into European circles, as he would facilitate fundraising among British sympathizers. Raising several £100s for arms, he would continue traveling around Europe through low-key movement evading Austrian and Papal forces, while he plotted his return to active insurgency, and by 1859, Garibaldi had raised a substantial force and funding.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
Organizing the Hunters of the Alps, a 3,000-man-strong volunteer force to support Piedmont Sardinia's efforts, On May 22, 1859, Garibaldi and his men crossed the border from Piedmont to Austrian-controlled Lombardy, initiating guerrilla-style operations independent from the main army. Their first major victory was on May 26, 1859, at the Battle of Varese. In the morning, Karl von Urban entered Varese. Garibaldi had already set up two robust defense lines. The Austrians opened fire with their guns and advanced in three columns. As they advanced against Garibaldi's right flank, his battalion opened up with devastating fire, routing the enemy into their other columns. Urban evaluated the field, understanding that Garibaldi and his forces were well entrenched, and called for a general retreat to Como. Following in pursuit in the morning, on the 27th, Garibaldi advanced towards Carmelata. Through the use of a screening force at Oligate, Garibaldi was able to distract the Austrians as he led the main force of his army northward in the directions of the mountains. This force then turned east and approached the San Fermo Pass. The Austrians were caught off guard, and the pass was only defended by a small force. Garibaldi decided to outflank the position and divided his army into three groups. Two to outflank and the center to push the attack on the Austrian position. Within a matter of hours, the Austrian position was captured. After the capture of the pass, Urban decided to send reinforcements from Como. Garibaldi was able to repel these attacks and forced Urban back into Como, affecting his troops' morale and his supply line. As Garibaldi weighed the risk of an attack on Como, Urban decided on a full retreat, leaving Como undefended for Garibaldi. Garibaldi would continue pushing the Austrians back all the way to Venetian territories. Despite the armistice of Villafranca on July 11th, Garibaldi continued to press operations in the Trentino area. His actions within a year would allow for the capture of Lombardy. On May 18th, Garibaldi built another force around 1,000 volunteers armed with unfavorable obsolete muskets and wore red shirts with gray trousers as their uniform. On the night of May 5th, a small group of volunteers seized two steamships in Genoa from the Rubentino Shipping Company. In reality, they were provided by the shipping company in a secret agreement with the Kingdom of Piedmont Sardinia. Their aim was to overthrow the Bourbon Kingdom of the Two Sicilies and annex its territories into the Kingdom of Sardinia. On May 11th, the volunteers landed at Marsala, evading or confronting Bourbon naval forces anchored in the harbor. Augmented by local Sicilian recruits, Garibaldi's force was around 1,400 by the time they engaged the Neapolitan army of around 4,000. At the Battle of Calamantafini on May 15th, the determination and tactical use of terrain secured a decisive victory, inflicting heavy casualties and prompting a Bourbon retreat. By June 21st, Palermo was fully under Garibaldi's control, and he proclaimed himself dictator of Sicily to administer the provisional government. His victories continued, securing the rest of the island by late July. In early August, Garibaldi crossed the Strait of Messina to the mainland with around 3,500, bypassing the Bourbon fleet and marched northward towards Naples. He entered Naples on September 7th amid a mass popular acclaim as King Francis II fled to Gaeta with his remaining forces. Garibaldi's army swelled to around 24,000 with volunteers and Sicilian irregulars. They confronted the main Bourbon army at the Battle of Volturno on October 1st. Garibaldi was determined to pin the Neapolitan army under the walls of Sapua, while crossing the Volturno and cutting off the king from his army at Gaeta. The Neapolitan generals concurred that Garibaldi had placed his army in a precarious position, seeing an opportunity to destroy Garibaldi by using a double envelopment. At 6 a.m., the Neapolitan army struck first on each flank, attempting their double envelopment. From Caserta, Garibaldi was able to dispense his reserves to his left flank. On the right, some of the Neapolitan forces actually lost their way, allowing the right to repel their uncoordinated attacks. As the ranged fighting went on through the day, around 2 p.m., the left flank determined that the Neapolitans were spent and issued a counterattack. The renewed vigor of Garibaldi's forces forced the Neapolitans back to Capua. Shifting aid to the right, the uncoordinated attack ended up stalling and withdrew by late afternoon. Narrowly winning the Battle of Volturno, Garibaldi lost around 2,000 troops, either killed, wounded, or taken prisoner, while the Neapolitans suffered 3,000 prisoners and casualties. By October 26, Garibaldi met King Victor Emmanuel II at Tino, formally handing over the conquered territories to Piedmontese authorities. By 1861, the Kingdom of Italy emerged with only one remaining adversary left on the Italian peninsula, that being the Papal State.
But you don't ask with respect. You don't offer friendship. You don't even think to call me Godfather.
Giuseppe Garibaldi's journey from a maritime exile to the hero of two worlds is more than a tale of military conquest. It is a story of a man who traded the safety of an anonymity for the volatile dream of a unified Italy. He was a man of paradoxes, a dedicated Republican who handed his conquest over to a king, a fierce revolutionary who eventually became a pillar of the very establishment he once sought to dismantle. By the time he retired to his quiet life on the island of Caparera, the Sardinian Godfather had done the impossible. He had taken a collection of desperate, foreign-dominated kingdoms and forged them into a single nation.